you doing, guys? Today we are going to finish up the oil pan. Essentially all the machining is done. I've sanded everything down. The finish looks really good. I really like it. But I'm going to need to spray it down with some brake cleaner and get the last of the marker out of the inside. Brake clean all the threads, blow them all out. I'm not too critical about the bottom ones, but the ones that are going to hold the engine block to the pan, I'm going to clean those out, clean this out, and then we'll get the gasket out because I got a brand new Kohler gasket for it. And then we're going to just do a couple little things to the motor and flip this thing over, bolt it on down, and eventually get that engine back out on the tractor. Down in the basement, we are going to start the process of installing the oil pan. I thought I'd show you a couple things before I actually get into it. Number one, the pan is completely cleaned. I'm going to give it one more wipe down before I put it together, but it's essentially all set. I got a brand new Kohler gasket, which is a big block Magnum 10 through 16, and that's the part number 235057-S. It's a good quality gasket. I figured instead of using these Chinese gaskets on this motor, I really want to try to give it a fighting chance of not leaking. So got a real Kohler gasket. I am going to use some of this sealer, Durco HT. I heard some really good things about it. A mechanic friend of mine actually said this is some high quality stuff. Whether or not it is, we'll find out. I guess steel chainsaws or steel equipment in general use this sealer in lieu of gaskets. So if you have like a two-stroke chainsaw, the case halves and everything, they use this stuff right here. So I figure if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me to try. Before I button it up, obviously this surface here will get completely cleaned, squeaky clean. The other thing I'm going to do is I am going to squirt some oil down into the oil holes for the rod and for the camshaft. Just give that a little pre-lubrication just to make sure that it's lubricated, even though if it was still sitting outside it wouldn't be lubricated like that. But give it a couple squirts of oil. I got my little pump bottle right there, and we'll take a look at that. One thing I wanted to show you, which is kind of interesting, is if I rotate the rod around, let me see if I can do this with one hand without destroying everything. All right. Bring it down, bring it down, bring it down, bring it down, bring it down. See, is that where I want to be? I want to be like right there. Man, that thing is, it's hard to show you. Let me get my flashlight, see if I can get this flashlight. Come on, stupid. I mean, when you shine the light in it, man, there's like barely any clearance between that rod and that camshaft. I mean, obviously, we would have an issue if the rod bearing went loose and then, that rod started to knock around. Clearly, we'd have some issues with that, slamming into things. One other thing I wanted to show you real quick. Let me get that flashlight again. Hopefully, it'll turn on. There it is. If we look down in the bore, actually, the piston's all the way up. I need to get that piston down. So let me just roll this over a little bit. There we go. A little better. We can look down in there. We barely have any scrapes. And this engine's probably got a good, I'd say, probably like 5 to 10 hours on it already. Maybe 10, maybe a little more than 10. But just a couple little skirt scrapes in there. No big deal. The hone is clearly visible. Let's rotate it around to the other side. So we've got this piston up, and then we'll go the piston down. And let's take a look at what we got on the other side. I'm not expecting anything too different. And when I look down in there, same thing. Just a couple hints of skirt scraping, which is very typical for these engines, especially when the piston is cold and you do a startup and you don't really let it warm all the way up to let that piston expand and tighten up. You'll see that kind of happen. This engine, clearly, I'm going to just go ahead and say it. There's no issues with this motor. So I'm going to rotate these oil holes up. I'm going to dribble a little bit of oil into each one of those oil holes. I'm going to start to clean the surfaces of both the pan and the block. I've already test fitted the bolts, so they're all set. I'm I'm going to butter up everything with a little bit, I mean just a hint of this sealer just to set everything into place. And then we'll get the bolts in and we will torque it down. I apologize for the noise in the background, but my wife has decided to do some laundry down here. So as you can see, the oil pan is installed. I do have this wedge right here. Nothing to be alarmed about. Basically, when I was tightening the oil pan down, it was shifting towards the bearing plate when I was tightening these bolts up. And I can't have that. I have to have almost this amount of space all the way through. The thing was shifting over and almost touching the bearing plate, which typically would not be a problem, but it is a problem for this application because these holes need to line up with the holes in the frame almost perfectly. I mean, if I got to hog a hole out a little bit here and a little bit there, not a big deal. It's, you know, it's not an original tractor, so who cares? Plus, you'll never see it. So, but I gotta have them as close as possible. So I know with this little bit of space, even a little bit less, these holes will line up with the frame holes. So that's the reason why I have this wedge in here. When I tightened it down, like I said, the oil pan would rotate and shift a little bit this direction. So, but with the little piece of wood here, we're all set. Everything is torqued down. It's supposed to be 90 inch-pounds according to the manual, but with everything being dressed like the cam cover and everything, it's nearly impossible to get my torque wrench in there without completely destroying everything. So I tightened everything down, and as you can see, we got a good fitment. There is some sealer like oozing out everywhere. I'm gonna let that fully cure, and then I'll take care of that when I flip the engine over. Plus, I'm gonna paint these bolts red so that way they blend in a little bit. The next thing I'm going to need to do is put my little oil drain fitting. I have it right here. Went to Home Depot, got a brass fitting. I took a file and filed all the edges smooth, the top. The other thing I did too is I drilled out the center of it, so that way I have a little bit more opening so the oil will flow out a little better. This thing is, you know, tapered fit, so I'm just going to go ahead and screw that in there like this. I'll put a little bit of the red sealer on the threads, tighten it down or snug it down so that way it seals up, and we should be almost all done with this project. Really, the next thing to do is to install it on the tractor. Got the little drain elbow in place with a little bit of sealer. I just snugged it in there, you know, firmly. It's not driven in there like crazy. One thing to take a note, which again I could have never had done again, but that was just deep enough, you know, just low enough. The fitting hole was just low enough, just so there's just a little bit of clearance. Now this is going to hang over the frame anyways, so that way we can drain the oil. But I couldn't have had that come out a little better. I'm going to put a piece of tape over this so that way nothing can fall into the motor. I'm going to let this sit for at least 24 hours in this position, so that way all of that sealer can cure for the most part, everything can settle in, and then I'm going to carry this heavy old girl upstairs and we'll mount it on the tractor. Oh, one other thing I should say, I did put a little bit of blue Loctite on these bolts, the 4 mounting bolts for the oil pan. I did put a little bit of blue Loctite on there. I did that only because obviously I don't want something to loosen up, and two, I didn't know if maybe expansion rates between the cast iron and the aluminum, not that it's, I mean, it's not a race motor, but just for safety purposes, I put some blue Loctite on those bolts, tightened them all down. I use a regular wrench. I just made sure they felt about the same. It's tighter than the 8.5 to 10 foot-pounds that it's supposed to be, but it is what it is. There's really no flex in this aluminum, so we should be good. All right, let's have this seal up or set up, and we'll be back at it. So after a little bit of pain and anguish, I got the motor up out of the basement. I got it sitting here on the frame. I haven't bolted it down yet. I will do that in just a few minutes, but I thought I'd just give you a quick look of roughly how it's gonna sit on the frame. It seems to look really good. I'm real happy with it. So let me get going on bolting it down and starting doing the hookups, like basically everything, you know, get the electrical done, get the throttle hooked back up, the choke, not the clutch, the choke, and maybe I might even be able to get some of the tins on. Okay, the motor is now bolted in place. It's tightened down. Everything went really, really well. Unfortunately, this one hole from up underneath, and I'll show you in a second, I did have to hog that hole out in the frame just a hair. I mean, like not even a 1/16 of an inch. The bolt hole in the bottom of the oil pan must have been, it's just a hair off, and the bolt wouldn't start straight, so it's, you know, like would go in a little crooked, and ultimately, you know, when you're working with aluminum, there's no chance for that thing to line up and straighten itself out. It's going to basically just blow the threads out. So I had to stop, regroup. I had to take the motor back off the tractor, file out the hole a little bit, and then we were able to get that bolt back in. So let's get underneath this thing, take a look at what I got, and hopefully this will look halfway decent in the picture. All right, so as you can tell, I use socket head bolts. There's one right there. There's an opposing one right here. And then on the other side of this foot bar, I got the other one here, and then there's obviously one right over in this corner. But I'm not gonna, it's bad enough that you're probably dizzy just looking at what I'm showing you now. But all of that, so basically this hole here had to be hogged out on this side a little bit in order to get it to line up, but it's all lined up, it's tight. My bearing plate is right up against the frame. Where's my finger? There it is. Right up against the frame, just like it's supposed to be, or how I originally designed it. So that's right up there. The motor is in place. Everything looks as if it's going to line up just fine. I did get my GT14 intake, made sure that it is going to clear the hood, which it does look. I got a brand new H10 spark plug, so I'm going to go ahead and put that in the motor, and I'm going to start putting the tins back on it. So let me get that going, and I will be right back. As you can see, we're moving along. Got all the tins back on. I hooked up the magneto wire. I got the air cleaner back on. The choke cable is hooked up. The throttle springs are back in place. I got to do the throttle cable. I'll work on that in just a few minutes. I did hook the belt up just to see make sure how everything lines up. And I got to be honest with you, it actually lines up better than it did with the other oil pan. So I'm really happy with that. I mean, I couldn't be happier with the way this is kind of lining up. That oil pan on a lining up basis looks like it's almost dead nuts, which is really cool. Everything is pretty much set to go. I'm going to pull it out in a little bit so we can see it out in the sunlight. But I'm going to keep moving on a little bit. I'm going to hook up that throttle. I think that's what's next. And then I got to start dealing with the wiring. Just to make sure that everything's going to work out, I went ahead and just put the hood on the tractor. And I'm really pleased with what I see. Number one, because that engine's lower now without the adapter plate, I got more room underneath the hood here between the blower cover and the hood. I'm real happy with that. Got good clearance, where is it? Right there. Good clearance from the GT14 under the hood. So all that looks nice and clean. Obviously the oil pan itself looks real nice down there. I'll just have to clean it up, but in general, that's all set to go. We got good clearance with the gear reduction steering, so that's all set. As I showed you, I have the belt on. The belt looks good. We got this side of the oil pan. It looks really nice. I'm real happy with it. Looks like we're going to have more than enough room with the new muffler to get it underneath the hood. So that looks great. Fuel pump is hooked back up. Right now I just got to do some wiring, so I'm going to finish that up and hopefully get the belt guard back on. Well, I think I'm pretty much done for today. Got a bunch done. I'm pretty happy with how everything came out. Obviously got the motor bolted down to the frame. Was able to hook up the choke and the throttle cables, so all those are ready to go. We can test it out by hitting the, so that's all back. The choke cable, that's all set. Got the air cleaner on and the bracket that holds the air cleaner, all that's all done, mounted. We know the hood clears. I finished most of the wiring. I got this test light, I'll show you what that is in a second. The fuel line. That's hooked back up. And I put the battery in it just to make sure everything works. So it's already on accessory, but if I hit this switch, the blue LED lights up. We have our rear red tail light. We hit this, our rear white light comes on, no problems. And our headlights are on. So that's all good. So the lights are working. So if we hit this, turn that off, and we hit the next switch with the red light, we hear my fuel pump, the electric fuel pump is on. If we go to start, because I don't have the battery cable hooked up to the starter, so this is safe. Plus, I don't want the engine to start right now, but if I go ahead and hit the, you can hear the starter solenoid click, and the light comes on, so we have continuity, and the dash light comes on with this ignition switch. So with that, I'm going to call it a day. Still have to put the muffler on, have to put oil in the motor, fuel it up, and give it a kick over. I guess we'll tackle all that in the next video. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. As always, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like these kinds of little videos on small projects, small engines, things of that nature. And always, thank you very much for your time and spending with me in these little projects. I truly appreciate it all. You guys have a great day.